All right. So um, we, before I go into some of the meaty details, I would like for you all to know that there's a team behind what we call TA support, and we call it our TA support task force, and we're really here to drive certain initiatives to really improve the TA experience. So we have people from Boston, Seattle, and in California. The people who, if you can see it, the people who are in bold are what we would consider like the hiring managers in that respective campus. So if you want, you could sort of just write their name down in case you have any questions about the TA hiring process. Right. Other people on the list are most likely people who are like academic advisors, actually, yeah, pretty much academic advisors. And I also want to just give a personal shout out to who's helping me right now with some of the tech support. Ashley, do you want to just say a quick hello?
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm just here to support Mike today, but I'm excited to see all of you. Some of you already know I'm an academic advisor for Align, specifically at the Boston campus, and my name is listed there as well. And I'm happy to get to know you guys more.
Awesome. Thank you, Ashley. One expectation I have, if you can keep your mics muted, that would just help us, just in case you never know if your cat runs through, if someone's mowing the lawn at this hour, it would help us a lot to get through the presentation. All right, so just in case you're wondering, what does the TA do? I just wanted to have a slide dedicated to the common responsibilities. So teaching assistants are really a crucial part of the classroom experience. And so they serve a variety of roles and they're not necessarily the same. And that depends on whether you are, whether you're at the undergraduate level or the graduate level, which campus you're at, or really specifically, what are the expectations of your instructor? But here are some of the responsibilities. You could be proctoring exams, grading tests and assignments. You could be responsible for performing teaching or teaching related duties. So a lot of instructors require or prefer that their TAs are actually available during class time. And I've seen TAs being used in different ways creatively, especially during the time of COVID. And so, for instance, one of my colleagues, instructors in the recitation courses in San Francisco, has TAs sort of on one of the Teams channels, so that if a student has a question during a lecture or during when the instructor is talking, that they can sort of sideline a TA to be able to answer questions, which I think is really cool. They also have a large hand with being a tutor or mentor to students. And I think part of this bleeds into sort of informal mentorship, just because of like your role. But often you are actually in the next line, you're maintaining office hours and you're doing a lot of times one-on-one tutoring, or you could be doing group tutoring. And that begs the, one of the purposes is for you to get to know your students and to maintain, like establish yourself as the TA. So you might have to do a little bit of self-marketing, because oftentimes, and TAs, correct me if I'm wrong, at the beginning of the semester, students are sort of reluctant or hesitant, or they don't know that they need help, and boom, all of a sudden, before it's too late, they realize they unload on you and realize how much help that they need. And so it's good to establish yourself at the beginning. Yeah, so office hours, also continuing the conversations or somewhat maintaining or monitoring the conversations on Canvas, Piazza, GitHub, or other related communication systems. All right. Okay. So in terms of expectations, I also wanted to go over some of like the business aspects of this, the compensation, um, and other information. At the undergraduate and master's level, there is somewhat of a, I would say, a rigid structure through compensation, where if this is your first, if during your first semester at Northeastern as a TA, you'll start at 18. And then there is an incremental increase with every semester that you are teaching. So let's say that fall 2020 is your first semester that you're a TA, you'll start at 18. Um, if you get hired for a spring course, spring 2021, then your hourly rate will go up to 18.25. For the most part, okay, and then I just want to clarify for the undergraduate, you start at the $15 an hour mark. Both positions, the responsibilities are between 6 to 15 hours a week. And so I think that really depends on the setup that your instructor has. And you'll know your weekly expectations given in your offer letter. But a good thing to know is that the university requirements are that student employees don't exceed 20, and then in Khoury College that students don't exceed 15. And your supervisor is really dependent on what kind of supervision are we talking about here. But for instance, I'm like the supervisor on paper, and I do the hiring and any pay discrepancies or questions really go through me. And then I also have a hand with some of the general TA support. Like one thing we do is we lead TA support sessions for all TAs to come together and just to talk through some, like any challenges you're having in the class, anything that you want to troubleshoot with the larger group. We have sort of those forum spaces. And because I'm at the graduate level, I'm pretty sure, we have other staff to sort of talk about like what happens at the undergrad level or the PhD level. I'm not as familiar with some of the TA support there. Your instructors also consider your supervisor, so any directives about your responsibilities, whatever they're envisioning with the course, comes from them. And so it's probably helpful to have like one-on-one meetings with them, consistently checking in with them, and making sure that connection has been established. In terms of the TA and student ratio, there isn't really a strong answer for this, but what I can say is that for the graduate level in Seattle, San Francisco, and Silicon Valley, the network campuses, as we call them, right now it's approximately 1 to 10 to 1 to 15. So 1 TA for 15 students, for instance. That number did go down, so it's approximately 1 to 10 right now, 1 to 12. Due to our situation with COVID. We've listened to many students who thought that the support for TAs is greater than usual. But it can go back up once we go back to fully on ground. With Boston, I think it varies. All right. For the PhD level, teaching assistantships is sort of folded under the graduate assistant umbrella. So the setup is different. Imagine that you're part of a PhD program. I think it's the graduate assistant package includes the idea that you're going to be a TA, but it also includes the idea that you're going to be a research assistant as well. And so the compensation is handed in a sort of a stipend form, 11 to 12K over a 4-month period, essentially a semester. And you would be dedicating about 20 hours to being a research assistant and 15 hours to being a teaching assistant. Supervisor is typically the same as your hiring manager, which would be Sarah Gale. who also serves as the advisor for PhD students, and then whoever your instructor is. And then the TA student ratio is approximately 1 to 15 as well. Uh-oh. All right. So another thing to talk about is application. How do I apply? So it depends on where your instructor is based. And so, and that's pretty much 90% aligned with where, like what campus you're based in, because you're likely to apply for class, to be a TA in a campus that you are at. But there are exceptions. So with Boston, hiring has actually begun. And just if anybody is wondering, the matching process, it's still occurring at this moment. Actually, I don't know if they're accepting applications anymore. I think they're sort of towards the end of the process. And then if you've applied already, you should be hearing from them soon. But matching is currently underway. For West Coast campuses, the situation actually is applications are going to be open the week of July 27th. So write that down if you're interested in applying, July 27th. And pretty much you're going to get an email from either me or Caitlin. And the matching process will follow after that. Yeah, the whole process will go into like early to mid-August. So who is eligible? Of course, you must have taken the course that you are applying to. So for those of you who are incoming students, unfortunately won't be able to apply for courses, but you will be able to apply the beginning or in the middle of your first semester when we open up the application process for spring 2021. In your application process, we do have you put down like what grade you have in the course. And so that is a way of demonstrating like that you show mastery of content. There isn't necessarily I wouldn't necessarily call it a requirement, but chances are you you want to be a teaching assistant for a course that you feel good about. And so I would say maybe a threshold is like B+, A-, A. And the matching is really a collaboration between me and all of the instructors. Yeah, so I just mentioned that. Yeah, so yeah, actually, I think that's it. Does anybody have any questions? Maybe I'll take a look at the chat.
Yeah, so we have some questions in the chat right now, Mike. Okay. One of them is, do we apply for a specific course? Are we able to apply to work with a specific instructor?
Yeah, that's a really good question. In the portal, it will show both information, but it is organized by course number. And so that's probably the easiest way to see it. Yeah.
Okay. And then can you share the link for Boston campus? Are we supposed to apply in general or have to approach the instructor?
Yeah, so you should be able to get a link if you haven't already. Let me see if I.
If you want, if you send me your email, Samir, hopefully I'm pronouncing your name correctly. If not, definitely DM me and I can have the correct pronunciation, but I can email you the link as well if you send me your email. Okay, the next question is if you've taken the graduate level of an undergraduate course, can you still apply to the TA the undergrad course? So if you've taken the graduate level of an undergraduate course, can you still apply to TA the undergraduate course?
I think that there is possibility there. I wouldn't stop you from applying. I think there's sort of an unwritten rule that if you're in like like the degree level above a certain program that you could be considered for a position, but I don't think it's necessarily written anywhere. So I think you would just need to apply to the same portal. If you're coming from if for instance you're a California student, where we only offer graduate level courses, the portal link that I will share won't give you access to undergrad courses. So I would just say reach out to me directly.
Everybody who is asking me to send the link, yes, I will do that. The next question is, what is the hiring process like in terms of interviews to demonstrate mastery of the content?
Yeah, so this is where the process gets a little, it's not a unified process in that sense. So instructors are given sort of the freedom to decide how they want to pursue. A lot of the times, interviews are not happening. It's mostly based off of the grade that you put down and sort of like, have you like reached out to the instructor? And so there isn't like a rubric that we hand out to instructors because the content really varies. And so what I do recommend, and this is something that we might talk about with the panelists, is like how they have, what they have done in order to, I don't know, get the visibility of their instructor. Like maybe they can talk about how did they get hired, and because chances are it's more than just the application there. So I think one thing that instructors have is monitoring or observing the class from the previous semester. And so one way that they sort of highlight students is just like their experience interacting with them. And so that's one thing to consider.
Another question that came in is, would it be possible to withdraw an application and send in another one at this point in time? This is specifically for someone who applied for the Boston hiring process and they realized that they wanted to TA for another course over the one that they actually selected.
Yeah, like I mentioned, I think that they are closer towards the end of the matching process. If you want, I would have you contact Megan Khoury. So you can go ahead and just leave your information. Ashley, can we make sure to follow up with that person?
Yep.
You know that? Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm actually going to pull up Megan Klogoshek's link and
Okay.
I'll email that as well. So the next question, can we apply for a TA position while on co-op?
Hello.
Oh. So, and here is Megan's name right here.
Yep, perfect. Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, of course. Our policy states that those who are on co-op should not be holding any student employment position. And so that's pretty standard across. That's a good question though.
I got a private message that asks, as a new graduate student, are we able to apply to become a TA if we got a course waived, even if we didn't take any course at Northeastern?
That's a good question. I don't see that very often, but I do think it's worth, I would say that's where maybe it's a situational thing. I think it's worth applying to. I do think there's something about the methods of Northeastern teaching the course that makes me think that instructors would prioritize current students in the program over somebody who has an equivalent course in another school. But I do definitely think it's worth the shot.
Hi, there's somebody that's unmuted. Can you mute yourself?
25th.
Okay, Mike, unmute yourself. Perfect. I muted everyone, and hopefully now you can mute.
Yeah, that's the only way to do it. Yeah.
Okay. So there's a next question. Can you only apply for TA positions within your department?
We typically only take in Khoury students from our side, and I can imagine that being the expectation across the university. But I'm actually not very knowledgeable if you can or not. I've seen situations where students outside of, for instance, in the College of Engineering, interested in applying for courses, and it's not a complete no. I do think that there is a level of priority for Khoury students because we want to make sure that Khoury students get jobs. So I can imagine it being the same the other way around.
Okay. And there's another question. It says, are TAs going to be able to remotely assist the class for the upcoming semester?
Ooh, yeah, that's a big question.
That's a big and a great question, and I got a lot of +1s for that. Don't worry, I was getting there. Definitely a great question.
That's a great question. I think that there is a flexibility, but I do think that that's where you would want to have a conversation with your instructor or supervisor to accommodate sort of your situation. The general rule in the university is to talk with whoever your reporting supervisor, and so to come up with sort of a plan for fall 2020. So although I can't necessarily say all across the board yes, I think I believe that Northeastern is taking a flexible approach, knowing the situation, and that a lot of your role, for instance, I don't see a reason why you couldn't host office hours online. I think maybe the question is the in-class piece.
And just as a quick tidbit, students can apply to a course if you've waived it in the past. It's encouraged that all students reach out to the professors that they want to TA for, as the professor is the person who makes the selections.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I don't see any more questions. So do we want to get started on the panel? And then if you guys have any more questions in between, we'll definitely weave them in.
Yeah,
Oh,
absolutely.
actually, sorry about that, Mike. Kendall is reposting, so I didn't see that. Thank you, Kendall. So there's a question that says, is there a conflict applying for a TA position with Khoury NU if I'm already a TA for the data science certificate program at another university?
So correct me if I'm wrong, but the question is if you've had previous experience at another university, like a parallel course, can they apply to that same course at NU?
Kendall, would you like, let me see if I can allow you to unmute yourself just so that you can explain that properly. Okay, would you like to unmute yourself?
Yeah, so I'm currently a TA through the data science certification program at UW. It's a continuing education program. It's somewhere in the realm of like 5 hours-ish per week demand, but depends on the class size. But anyways, so it's more of a question of like concurrency. Does being a TA for one university and then wanting to apply for being a TA at NU kind of like disqualify me from working at both, essentially?
Yeah, Kendall, that's a good question because I can see why there might be a concern there, and it's one of those in between. I don't think there's anything holding us back from offering you a position, even if you have a 5-hour TA position in another place. Because I know we want to be mindful of people's workload, and so one thing that we don't allow to happen is for you to have a full-time job and also be a TA. Or sorry, an internship or a co-op and also be a TA. I think having a 5-hour TA position, that should be fine. Yeah. Okay. I would probably also, just in case, say that you probably want to check in with Caitlin Kidder, who would be the hiring manager for Seattle.
Well then, thanks.
Yeah.
Just to stress what Mike said again, everybody that's boldly highlighted, so in Boston, that would be Megan Chloe Groshek, Seattle, Caitlin Kidder, and San Francisco, Silicon Valley, Mike, who we have here. Those are your points of contacts for any TA questions that you have at the respective campuses. So you can just contact those people directly if you have any additional questions.
May I ask, is Aaron Weiss in the chat? I'm sorry, is Aaron Weiss in the room? One of our panelists. I just want to make
Yes, I am.
Aaron, okay. Good to hear from you because I just saw an email, but I didn't read it. Okay.
Yeah, there were 2 sets of Zoom links, one of which did not work, the other of which went through, Northeastern's whatever safe link thing, but after some finagling worked.
I see. Well, I'm glad you're able to find the correct one. My apologies for sending the wrong link. You weren't the only one who had trouble getting in. All right. So I think it is time for us to transition over to the panel because they are the stars of this presentation. I'm going to go ahead and introduce them. So we have 4 panelists, all from sort of like different walks of life in the Khoury program, programs, and also in different campuses. So we have Aaron joining for the first time, is from the Boston campus, is in the PhD program, and the motto here is live your fullest life. Thank you, Aaron. We also have David. David, he, him, his, also from Boston, is at the undergraduate level, and the motto here is there's always something to improve. We have Jessica from my home campus, San Francisco, pronouns are she, her, hers, in the Master's of Computer Science program, in the Align program specifically, and her motto is you're already at no, why not try for a yes? And then we have Sean Hellman at Seattle. His pronouns are he, him, his, is also in the MS level. His motto is follow your arrow. So again, welcome all of you. Thank you for joining us. You have a nice audience here, and I wanted to go into the first question. So I came up with 4 questions, and then I also want to leave some time to answer some of the Q&A from the audience. So we'll just go to it. The first thing is, what advice do you have for students who are interested in being a TA for a class they are currently in? And what advice do you have for students who are interested in being in class, being a TA in a class that they have taken in the past? Do you have different advice, same advice? Feel free to begin.
Yeah, apparently everyone except me can't unmute themselves.
Oh, really?
I think you guys should be able to. Can you try again?
Oh, it works now.
There you go.
There you
Thank
go.
Yep, same. Oh gosh, this is one of those things where no one knows who's going first. I'll start off. My advice applies to both cases, whether you're currently taking the class or you've taken it before. I would just recommend taking some time, whether it's after class or at another time, to just chat with the professor of the course to express your interest, and just sort of take an opportunity to get to know them a little bit so that they're familiar with you, and that you can then again express your interest then and again when you apply.
Yep, I completely agree with this. You definitely have to talk to your professor if you want to be their TA. You have to get to know them. But if you're on a smaller campus, like the SF campus is a lot smaller, if you get to know just the staff in general, then you'll most likely get to know the professor you want to TA with, because we have a smaller campus. But definitely get to know them and make sure you understand the content. Because if you apply to a program and you don't necessarily understand everything, or there's something you felt rocky with, talk to that professor, see if that's something they're going to emphasize the next semester or not.
Yeah, I guess to add on to that, sometimes the professor might not be too accessible. In that case, you could always talk to the existing TAs, just because the TAs and the professors usually work pretty closely together. So as long as you get to know the TAs and talk to them and show your interests, I'm sure that'll work in your favor as well.
Yeah, I don't think I have particularly much to add here.
All right, thank you all. So the next question is, what is a highlight of being a TA?
I guess for me, I would say that the primary highlight of being a TA is really having one-on-one interactions with students and being able to have a big impact on their actual educational experience, especially considering the fact that like even sort of the best and most talented professor is really never going to have enough time to have, especially this is true of Boston campus. It might be less true of some of the smaller campuses, but even the most talented professor is not going to have enough time to really have like meaningful one-on-one interactions with, you know, as many as like 600 students in some of the biggest classes. And that's an opportunity for you to make a really huge difference in somebody's life.
For me, I would say it's probably just being able to share your love for the course or even just CS in general, because not all your peers might share the same interests. And I think a cool part about being a TA is that you have that platform to sort of show why they should enjoy it and why it's cool. And it's always nice to be able to help people with something they're struggling with, only to see them, you know, finally get it at last. And, you know, you can see that smile run across their face. It's always nice.
So I got to know my TAs during the Align portion when I did it. So I began to just love my TAs. They're super nice. And it's really nice to then transition because you get to be that person who, the Align program is all about transitioning. So I got to be that person to help someone really understand CS, switch from their previous art major into computer science. And it's just a really great experience. And you meet a lot of classmates who are really smart and become great study partners in the future.
I'll just add quickly, I fully agree with what the other panelists have said to this point. There are so many highlights of being a TA. One thing that I really love is being able to have mastered and to explain something to someone that I used to really struggle with. It's a really great feeling of accomplishment. So.
Thank you, everybody. It sounds like the common denominator is that there's some sort of like internal fulfillment and that this is not just a job, right? Because y'all don't get paid that much, you know, and so you must have some sort of like internal motivation to be able to do this. So. Now, on the flip side, what was a challenge that you handled and how did you overcome it?
COVID-19 was definitely a challenge. We were on spring break when it came back, and then we didn't come back at all. And it was a huge rush to figure out what students had documents. Some people were leaving the country, other people were just scared. And so that time it turned into being more just someone they could talk to and know that you'll be there available for them from 3 to 6, just to talk to, even if they don't want to actually go over code. So I think the biggest challenge was just being there, being supportive, and trying to just help someone understand, redirecting to resources for like the CARES Act and things like that that were coming out. So I guess that was the biggest challenge, just making sure you're there, available, and everyone knows you're present. Because after COVID hit, no one wanted to answer their email, no one wanted to look at their phone. So you really have to, when Mike said self-advertise, you really have to advertise so everyone knows who you are. They don't just think you're an extra student in the classroom.
I would say for me, it can be challenging sometimes to try to explain a concept or concepts to many different students because there isn't a one-size-fits-all approach. And you know, you may explain something to a student one way and they get it, and you may try to explain it to another student the same way and they don't get it. So sometimes you have to be creative and you have to come up with ways, and you have to think about different ways to explain something in a different way until the student gets it. And it's just a matter of persevering.
Yeah, I guess in a similar vein to what Sean just said, as a TA for some of the intro to CS undergrad courses, I see a lot of different backgrounds. Some people have coded a lot, some people have, never touched code in their life. And so it's a big challenge of trying to figure out how to explain these brand new CS concepts to people that have never really thought about this stuff before. And figuring out how to overcome that through, talking to your fellow TAs and getting advice from them, or just, talking to the professor and seeing what they have as input. Just figuring out how to overcome that is really a rewarding and useful skill, I think.
It's a bit of a different vein, but I think based on some of the questions that I saw like flying in the Zoom chat, I think this is going to be relevant to some people, which is like, so as a PhD student, I was TAing for the very first intro course at the Boston campus, the fundamentals of computer science. And it has a very particular pedagogy associated with it. And so I obviously, I did not go to Northeastern as an undergraduate. I did not take this course. I've never taken this course. I've never taken that pedagogy. So there was definitely a challenge in terms of like figuring out how the course is taught and what the goals are in sort of in how it's structured and what material is covered and what material is not covered and so forth. And I don't think that there was like a particular trick to overcoming it other than just like putting in the work to both like read the book that they have for this, which is motivating why they're doing this, talking to the professor about why the curriculum is designed in these ways and so forth. But I think it's very relevant in general to like, oh, I haven't taken this course, but maybe I've taken something similar and I want to TA it here now that I'm here. I think you're going to have to put in a lot of work like that to sort of understand how the course is taught and sort of what needs to be conveyed in it.
Thanks so much, Aaron and everybody. And it sounds like the one serious aspect about this position is really trying to get into like the mind of the student and understanding various learning styles and understanding how to navigate it under some more stressful situations, trying to be available to them, meeting students when they're at, especially during this COVID-19 season. I just wanted to say I appreciate y'all's perspective. And my final question, and then we can leave it to the group, is how do you see the TA experience will help you in your next steps or career journey?
Oh, I can start with that one. Definitely working as a TA has really given me some really eye-opening career strategy advice. You just learn how to manage your schedule. You learn, since I came from a law background, so learning to switch to a tech schedule to understand how to do this at their proficiency, their level. When you're a TA, you really shore up your concepts, because if I can explain what a binary search tree is to a new person, then I can explain what a binary search tree is to the interviewer who will pay me money for it. So you really learn to improve your career, and also just you get better explaining concepts, since it's really hard to understand a concept, but it's harder to explain it and have someone else understand it. So I think really working as a TA really gave me that leg up, that I wasn't able to fully explain those concepts, but when I worked as it, I was able to get more teaching mechanisms. And they also share out slideshows that will teach you like better ways to portray yourself, better ways to convey, to teach. And so working as a TA, the experience itself was really great. And I really do think it had a positive impact on my career journey. And I say that as I TA'd all through my undergrad, and I don't think it had any bearing on my career journey.
I think it's a great experience to be able to add to your resume. It really conveys a lot, conveys your knowledge and mastery of the subject, conveys initiative, and it shows that you're able to work in sort of a management, teamwork, collaborative role, and that's those soft skills are important in whatever industry or whatever company you're going to apply to. So it's a great thing that you can add to your resume for sure.
Yeah, I can't say I have much to add. Especially, I can't really speak much to going into academia, but especially for industry, definitely gives you some of the soft skills that are really important, not just for interviews, but also just everyday work life with your colleagues.
I kind of held back because I think I'm sort of generally in a different position as a PhD student, which is that like the primary function of my degree program is training for a career in academia. So yes, it very consciously maps to the next step in my career, and that the goal would be to pursue a tenure track academic job after this, and that necessitates having teaching experience at least. Or well, I guess it doesn't necessitate it because there are plenty of people who can get jobs without it, but the degree program even, for instance, requires completion of TAing. But I think it's important insofar as like I think of myself as somebody who does care deeply about teaching, and I want, even if I'm lucky enough to get a faculty job, to still continue to care about it. And so, you know, all the practice is significant. And I also TA'd all throughout undergrad, and I think it had a similar impact in terms of even helping me want to even pursue this kind of career path.
All right, well, y'all passed my test. So now we can go into, you finished completing my questions. Now we can go to questions from a large group. I noticed that there was at least one, but there might be more from the group chat.
There
Ashley?
are more now.
Okay.
So Jessica, this one is more centered towards you. They said, I'm an incoming student in the Align program. So I wanted to ask Jessica whether being an Align student made any difference in a positive or negative way. I'm assuming in the TA process as a whole.
Oh, yes. I think that was Ari. I did message them, but what I said was I feel like the Align program put me in a unique position. So I understood what it was like to have no idea what the professor was talking about after I just saw something in a completely different language. And it was easier to help someone who felt, I guess, shocked by not knowing what it was, and then explaining it to them more like real world terms, less like a less scientific explanation, since I found myself lost with that too. But overall, I think no matter what program you're in, if you talk to your professor and you understand the material, there's not really any positive or negative. I guess if you're in the Align program, you get that extra year of classes you can TA for Align programs. That could be fun.
Mm-hmm, definitely. Great question, Ari. So the next question is from Betty, and it asks, what is your approach when helping students, and how do you work towards ensuring students are learning the material? And this is open to anybody on the panel.
I guess I would say I don't know that I necessarily have one overarching approach. I do try to be really, really inquisitive with students and checking in with them. So, you know, if they're asking me to explain a particular algorithm or a concept or whatever the case may be, instead of going along an entire explanation and then asking them at the end, did that make sense? I kind of try to check in periodically to make sure that they're still on board with what I'm saying. So that's something that I somewhat apply across the board.
Something that I hear a lot from, you know, my courses, professors and organizers is that the best way to sort of make sure that the students actually engaged in learning the things that you're telling them is to constantly ask them questions, even if it's something very simple and like something that they should know, like as a certain, you should still ask it, because even if, you know, they know it, and them being able to answer the question is kind of like a small morale boost. And, you know, if they're asking you for help, it probably means that they're struggling with something, and that's something that's really important.
Yeah, in a similar vein, I think that you can use those questions sort of very consciously to gauge what parts of the course material the students understand and what parts they're sort of missing, sort of by, I guess, digging in on the areas where they're sort of under specific in their answers. Like if you ask them about like some particular concept that they're working with, and they're able to give an answer that like generally covers the material, but there's like some holes in there, then poking at the holes is generally a good way to sort of push them to either realize that they do know it already, or push them to come up with their own questions for you to sort of fill in the gaps.
There's not much to add to that, but I mean, beyond those strategies, which are like the best ones to use, I like to see if they can explain it to me. And I'm like, well, if I was a person who doesn't understand this, can you explain it in a way I'll understand and then be able to talk about the concept? And it's the whole poking method. You see what they really don't explain, and if they explain it clearly, you're like, okay, you get it. If they don't, or don't say anything, then they're talking about, and it's time to break in deeper and figure out what's wrong.
Great question, Betty. So the next question that we have here is, do students from Canadian campuses get the opportunity to TA? And this is more for Mike.
Yeah, so as many of you know, you're probably referring to the Vancouver campus.
Yes.
And with Vancouver being really new, I think it's a sort of I have a common sense response to that, and it's more about, I know that they need TAs. I don't exactly know how their TA selection is being executed. And so what I can do, and if I can make sure to get your email address, is to make the follow up on what the Canadian TA process is, assuming there is one.
Can you send your email address and name, because your username is just numbers and letters? That would be really helpful for us.
Yeah. I wish I had a better answer than that, but we'll help you find out what the current situation with that is.
Okay, so the next question is, how do we balance the coursework and workload of the TA? So how do you balance both being in classes, but also working at the same time as a TA?
I learn. So keep your calendar up to date. It's very important. The way I worked a part-time job and then I TA'd, and then COVID hit, job was removed out of the question. But basically, you just make sure that you keep your calendar up to date, and make sure that you keep your hours open. So I used to do it. So every Sunday I would release, let everyone know what hours I could do it. Anyone who wants an appointment, I worked on Wednesday, so I tried to keep it off days I wasn't busy. But really, it's easy, pretty manageable, and you get to talk to your professor and really tell them what you can do, what you can't do. And so my professor knew I wasn't free on Wednesday because I work in Napa, and so I can't be in San Francisco. But as long as you talk to them and really let them know your schedule. I had a TA who she lived in New Mexico. I don't think she never came to campus ever, but she worked remotely, and our professor had talked to her and they had prearranged that arrangement. So she worked and was on Zoom every single day for online classes, our labs, our class. We could talk to her, we could message her at all times. And so you really just work out your schedule, and then your professor works with the time you give them, as long as you give enough time.
It depends a little bit on the situation for the class that you're TAing. I've been in situations where I'm the sole TA, and I've also been in situations where I'm part of a group of TAs. And in the case of the latter, if there are other TAs in those situations, sometimes different TAs will pick up more work during one week while other TAs have more going on in their classes, and vice versa. I will say that the students, at least the fellow TAs that I've worked with, are really collaborative, really supportive, really great people. So you can kind of work it so that you shift your schedule based on who has the most availability to grade or answer questions or whatever.
Yeah, I can't say I have much more to add than that. I think they put it pretty well.
One thing that I would say is that, and it's not necessarily the most happy thing to hear, but there are lots of demands that are placed on students, student workers, and so forth. And at some level, like, even as much as we might care about this, like, you do have to make sort of a line in the sand and say, like, this is what I'm capable of doing, and I can't do more than this. Because it's very tempting, especially, this didn't happen at Northeastern, but when I was an undergrad, I was in a class that was particularly bad. Like, the teacher was not very good at teaching, the students were not understanding the material that was being covered, and my immediate reaction was to try to, like, bail out the entire class, essentially. Which, especially as an undergraduate, you don't have the time, no one has the time, no one's paying you for that. You can't do it. Like, and you'll only hurt yourself by trying, and it won't like you won't be able to benefit the students in the way that you want to. So I think it's important to remember, like, at some level, whatever it is, that there is a limit to what you can do, and you have to be real with yourself about what that is, and obviously real with the professor you're working with too, about sort of what the boundaries of what you can do for this course are.
Okay, great. The next question is, how do you manage being a TA remotely? So how do you guys manage remote work while being a TA, especially now during this time?
It's pretty much the same as regular work, you know, maintain your calendar, make sure you really amplify your online presence. So maybe make a post, when you host office hours, send out an email, make sure everyone knows what's happening. And eventually, I feel like a lot of people now have really transitioned to get more used to being online. And especially, I mean, in Khoury College, our work was a very fast transition. It wasn't too difficult. So I still held Zoom hours instead of in person. But Zoom, Teams, GitHub, you get really used to them, and everyone, the students will work with you. If they feel like they can't reach you, you'll get emails in your inbox and they'll let you know, hey, I need you on this day, or I need to talk to you on this time, and they reach out. So at a certain point, they'll reach out and let you know. But Zoom, Teams, make announcements. It's pretty much the same, just now you have to advertise yourself a little bit more.
I'm getting a lot of private questions as well about the remote work. So definitely if you guys have more insights about, I guess, how it's been overall, what are some things that you have experienced about it that's been good? What are some negatives about it? Those are the general questions that I'm receiving.
So I can only say a little bit because I was TAing a graduate course last semester that was kind of mostly over in some ways by the time things really blew up, but because I think it was like 2 weeks before they actually ended up taking what is essentially the final for the class, and then the rest is working on a project essentially. But I guess one thing that definitely did change is, besides like moving on to Zoom, is that sort of as a baseline, students were just less engaged immediately. They didn't, like, fewer people showed up to office hours. When they did, they, like, the same people who were showing up and asking many questions in person were much more like, I don't know, like standoffish or skittish about things. So I sort of got much less out of the experience personally. And I don't think that it was as helpful to the students. But it's sort of something at this point that we have to just deal with. Like, I don't think anyone would choose it necessarily if they want, if it was all up to us, but yeah.
Great questions, everyone, and great responses. Does anyone else on the panel would like to reply?
Just to tack on to what Erin said, you do lose some of that. There's just a little bit of magic when you're, you know, interfacing with people face to face, IRL, if you will. The one thing that I try to do when I host office hours is I try to make sure that I keep my camera on. I know sometimes it's easy when you're at home looking kind of schleppy to turn it off. But it is really nice to just sort of reinforce the face-to-face interaction, even if it is behind a wall of ones and zeros.
Definitely, great answer. Would anybody else on the panel like to reply?
Unfortunately, I can't really say much to this because I was on co-op during the spring semester, so didn't really have the opportunity or the challenges that came with TAing remotely. So I was actually just learning a lot from my fellow panelists. So I will probably be dealing with this next semester.
Awesome. Well, you guys have been doing great work. So thank you guys so much for all the work that you've been doing as TAs. It doesn't go unnoticed, and it's mentioned across campuses. So keep up the great work. The next question that we have here is, during the interviews or during the TA position itself, is it okay for us to use layman terms to explain the concept rather than using complex jargon to demonstrate the subject knowledge?
So is that for Mike, or because they didn't interview at the SF campus at all?
Yeah, a good point, Jessica. I think So as mentioned earlier, I think interviews don't necessarily happen or happen consistently. So unless the panelist has had an interview experience, go ahead and talk about it, but maybe we can talk about during the TA position itself.
Yeah, so the second half of the question, which I still think it can be answered generally, it's mostly, as you're a TA, is it okay for you to use layman terms, or do you want to demonstrate the concept with complex jargon that to show that you have good subject knowledge? Or how do you go about these questions and problems?
I would say for that, I guess my thought on that is never use complex jargon just for the sake of using complex jargon. If it's a term that you think is important for someone to know for an interview, or just because they're going to hear it in industry, absolutely, I think that you should use it so that they become familiar with what it is and how to use it and what it means. But I think that you should prioritize whatever language is going to work best for the individual that you're working with in order for them to understand what they're trying to understand.
I couldn't agree more with that. Definitely use terms that someone will understand. Definitely, if they use a more complex scientific term, explain it in layman's terms. So definitely that way the person has a concrete foundation and understands what they're talking about and what you're talking about. Because if you're using complicated terms and they were already confused, they're not going to want to come back to you because you weren't an opening, welcoming environment. Instead, you were another scary person using scary terms.
Yeah, I'd say that as a sort of concrete approach that I tend to apply in this vein is that I think I strive to explain things as simply as possible and then introduce the jargon that corresponds to what I said. Because like plenty of things, especially my research area is programming languages, and that's something that I've talked to the students a lot about. And plenty of the things that we talk about have like at least somewhat intuitive mappings based on like prior experience doing some programming, and it's much easier to explain in those terms, which are at least relatively simpler, than to just like say, here's a bunch of like very mathy formal jargon and here's some definitions for it. I think people tend to have a better time understanding it by saying, sort of getting at the intuition first and then introducing the words. They're less caught up in what they are.
Yeah, I completely agree. Like one of the big reasons why using layman terms might be even more preferred is because if you say something, say like a huge word that they don't even know, they're probably going to be spending more time thinking about what that word means and less about the words that are actually coming out of your mouth, explaining the concept. I actually did have an interview for my TA position for one of the Intro to CS courses, and I would say, obviously you want to prove that you know your stuff. So, there's no reason why you can't use complex jargon, like we've been talking about with just, explaining to students. But, if explaining in layman terms helps you demonstrate that you actually know what you're talking about, then I'd say it's fine either way, as long as you can just demonstrate that you know your stuff.
I can also add just like a note about interviews in general. My sense is that you won't have one if you're not an undergrad, pretty much. Like, if you're a master's or PhD student, you might have something at most that's like a sort of informal interview that's just sort of like talking to you as a person and sussing out sort of whether you're equipped and care enough about doing this to do it. But it's not going to be like a test where they're trying to like ask you like content questions from the course or something and see if you get it. I think that's assumed if you're a master's student or a grad student of any kind.
Okay, great. So the next question that we have here, just one moment. I'm getting a lot of private questions with email addresses, so thank you for your patience while I keep scrolling. Okay, so the next question. Okay, I personally found the lectures more engaging, and there was not a lot of need for office hours because there were only open-ended projects left. Question for the panelists. Have you ever repeatedly applied for the same position after not being accepted?
Yes, a lot. That's where I got my motto. You're already at no, why not try for yes? They already said no, might as well try again. But I don't think you can apply for the same TA position multiple times. You can only really apply once, and then the next semester you can try again. And if you don't get it the first time, you should try again, because, you know, what's worse than them telling you no? They already told you no.
Yeah, I think it's also important to note that the professors of classes change from semester to semester, and it's mostly at their discretion. So the next person might like you better, or like somehow you might resonate better with them as a candidate for being a TA for one reason or another. So yeah, I wouldn't take it too personally.
I have nothing to add.
Yeah, same for me.
Okay, great. Well, I don't see any more questions here. Do you guys want, okay, perfect. One just came in. I'm currently doing a summer course and will join Northeastern in fall 2020. Can I apply for a TA position for the course I'm currently doing? Thanks. This is for Mike.
Short answer is yes, as long as you've taken the course. I think that would be my answer. As long as you've taken the course before the end of, before the beginning of the term that in which you are applying to.
Okay, any more questions here in the chat? And also, Jessica, great answers. Everybody on the panel, you guys are doing an amazing job. There are a lot of students who are writing to me privately saying how amazing you guys are doing. So just noting that as well. So keep up the great work here. Any more questions, guys? Feel free to send them to me privately or in the chat. I'm happy to ask our panelists or Mike.
And I just wanted to note that I put in the Vancouver TA points of contact. So it's very similar to the Seattle staff who are holding down the fort for Vancouver right now. And if you have questions about Vancouver TAing, hiring, contact Caitlin or Jackie.
And I have something to add about the jargon. I would say think of the audience first. Why are you using the jargon? What is the reason that you choose to use the jargon? If it's just that you want to show off or try to act like you know the concepts, most people can actually see right through that. So I'd be careful and really read the room and read the audience first before you decide what type of language you'd like to include in your conversations with students, especially since everyone is learning in this process. Everybody is a learner. Nobody is an expert, and it's a collective and collaborative environment when you're meeting with a TA. So let's see if there's any other questions here. What is the toughest situation you have been in as a TA? Have you ever fallen short of answers?
That happened to me. I actually, a student asked me, they had lost their home and they had lost their job and they had no money. And I only knew about the CARES Act, but I had a call with Mike. He gave me some links and I sent it to them. And hopefully, according to, they called me, sent me a text later and told me they were able to apply for assistance. And I guess that was the toughest question I ever had, since it wasn't necessarily content-based.
Thank you, Jessica, for bringing up that example, because I also want to note that as a TA, you're sort of a frontline person in which you might get things about people's personal situations because you are the trusted person. And in some ways more trusted than an advisor. Not that we're not trustworthy, I'm just saying because they're probably, because TAs are really at the front line. And so there is no expectation that you're the person to handle and resolve that situation for them. I just want to let you know that. That you have a good team of people who, and that's probably where you want to know like the resources involved. And that's part of what is covered in TA training about what we call resource referral. So knowing when to go to the student services director or to the Title IX officer, or, you know, the health office for different situations. And so just know that you might be the first person to get those questions.
Yeah, you guys are definitely essential workers, but I also want you guys to know that this is why we're here as well as advisors. There's a lot that you guys deal with that because these are your peers, you're able to really connect with them on a level where the conversations are more intimate, and it can get stressful and overwhelming. So I want you guys to know that this is why your advisors are here as well, and to offload anything to your advisor that you need help with as well, because especially now after COVID and a lot of situations that are going on globally, now more than ever, you guys are going to have a lot of different conversations. Some of them can be difficult, and it's best for you to use your advisors at any given point in time to have that support as well. So the next question that we have here is, do candidates with no work experience have any chance of getting a TA position? And that would be more towards Mike.
Do candidates with no work experience have any chance of getting a position?
So basically what you're asking is like whether or not you'd be able to be a TA if you haven't worked at all.
Right,
is that
yeah, and I would say that we don't necessarily evaluate candidates on the fact that they don't have any work experience. I would say that one of the bigger factors is if you have mastered the content in the course, and so you could be a front runner for a position even if you didn't have work experience, what we would call like traditional work experience. And so I don't want that to discourage you from applying at all.
Okay.
I would also just add that like if you're an undergrad, that you're probably, especially if you're before comp, everyone's in the same boat probably. Or like if they have work experience, it's maybe not as relevant to, like, it's unlikely that there's going to be a lot of undergrads who in their like first couple semesters who have teaching experience, right? Like it's not going to be like this mad rush of like credentialism or something.
Good point, Erin.
Okay, so I don't see any more questions here, just a lot of thank yous, and you guys are very welcome. Thank you to our panelists as well for coming today. We really appreciate everything that you guys are doing and all the responses to the questions. They were incredibly helpful and definitely inspiring for a lot of people in the room, especially those that have private messaged me saying thank you to all of you several times. So thank you again. And one that's saying this session was the best one at Northeastern. So thank you. That's so sweet. Oh, okay.
Awesome.
So any more questions, or if that's all, then great. Mike, do you have anything, closing remarks or anything before we end? I just like to thank the panelists again, 100-fold. Thank you, because you guys gave great responses and everybody's very happy. And so am I and Mike.
Yeah, thank you, Jessica. Thank you, Erin, Sean, and David. I really hope if there's one thing that you took away from the session is that to join the TA team, I think it's a great experience. And I wish I was one at that stage in my career. And we also want to make this an even better experience every semester that goes by. So thank you, everybody. I hope you all have a good night. Anybody who hasn't attended the session that you hear of, we recorded it, so we're going to share this out.